Let's talk about mixing. Mixing is something, as I mentioned in the last video, that is its own art form, its own thing to learn. There are people who spend their entire lives becoming incredible mix engineers. And then that's what they do. They get paid for that. They live in that space. And you can picture a mix engineer, someone sitting behind a giant board in a studio, moving the faders and trying to get everything to come together. Mixing, though, of course, as with editing, is something that has creative applications within the composition creation side, as well as a technical practice. And not to say that the technical practice of mixing something that's been pre-recorded or something like that is not artistic, because it certainly is. For the moment, though, what I'm interested in for you as someone who's in an intro to Sonic Arts class is to learn principles and techniques of mixing so that you can apply them both to the creation side as well as towards the production of sound artworks that are competent, even, and that people enjoy listening to. So mixing is where we try to essentially get all of the sounds that constitute a sonic artwork or project to work together. That's essentially taking all of the various sound events and how they either overlap with each other or relate in time to each other, and making it so that none of them pop out, so that none of them are too quiet, so that they don't cover each other, but so that if there's a moment where there's 50 sounds playing at once and we need to hear all 50 of them, that they work together in a way that we can hear all 50 of them and they're not covered up by one or two sounds. Mixing is also taking a project and trying to make it go from beginning to end and sound as though it's the same piece, and that it doesn't have too wide of a dynamic range or amplitude range, that it stays within certain frequency bounds, that it meets certain tonal characteristics. And obviously, I mentioned a lot of those same things for mastering, which gets confusing, and there are a lot of similar processes between the two, but mixing really deals with, on the track level, with multiple tracks, bringing those things together. And another caveat, another rule to break, is that we can mix something that's only a 2-track stereo file when we're thinking about some of these larger concepts. And we'll talk about how that happens later. But mixing, again, is the idea of trying to bring things together so that they work together as a single cohesive whole. Mixing as an art form really started to become more difficult and require more study and practice when we moved from single microphone, double microphone recording of everyone at once to individual mic'd recordings of sound sources. So it used to be that in old studios, they'd put a single microphone in the middle of the room, and then everyone would arrange themselves around that microphone with distance and space, such that when they played, the microphone would pick everyone up in the appropriately mixed level. So you actually recorded it kind of pre-mixed. When we started moving to a situation where we might mic the singer individually from the guitar, from the bass, from the drums, there was this situation in which the recorded sounds didn't sound like they belonged in the same space, let alone were the same thing. This becomes even further exacerbated in a overdub tracking type situation, where we might record the bass and drums, and then at a later time record the guitars, and then at a later time record the vocals, and then at a later time record any of the other complementary side instruments. Not only are things being recorded on separate tracks with separate microphones, but they're actually being recorded potentially in different spaces at totally different times from each other. And so there becomes this quality in these tracks where they don't sound like they belong together. They don't sound like they were recorded as a band playing live. And so mixing tries to create Mixing tries to marry these individual sounds together so that they sound like a total. So they sound like a single project. So they sound like a single piece. There's a lot of tools of mixing, but today we're going to talk about two tools that we're particularly interested in. The first is amplitude, and the second is panning. Amplitude refers to how much gain we're essentially applying to a track to make it louder or softer. One of the goals of getting two sound sources to work with each other over time is that we might have to adjust the amplitudes of these sources in order to make sure that they work together. Furthermore, we might have to actually adjust the amplitude of these sources over time to make sure that they continue to work together over time in relationship to each other. Panning or placement in the stereo field refers to how we actually place sound sources in between our two speakers or two headphone ears. Where is the source at? Is it in the center? If all of the sources are in the center, then it's mono. It has no depth. It has no width. It doesn't have this sense of breadth to it. But if everything gets too wide, too spread out, then there's no core. So thinking about where we place things is really important. So some things you might want to contemplate, some basic kind of high-level thought processes here. Let me move over here. So some creative applications of mixing. Again, with editing, there's kind of creative, got the composer hat on, creative hat on, versus the technical hat. And we can use the same techniques and tools in both settings. And with amplitude, some things that we want to contemplate are kind of the idea of relative amplitude differences between sound sources. And I've got this cheesy graphic here to try and articulate some of this. In the first top left here, that's going to be a horrible color. Let me grab a different one. Red. In this top one here, we're assuming that we've got three sound sources, right? That are occurring at the same time as each other. In this example, we're adjusting the amplitude of each of them so that the loudness of them sounds the same. So that they essentially can all sound as though they're being placed in the exact same position of importance. Now, I haven't defined the term loudness yet, and I haven't actually officially defined the term amplitude. Loudness, we're going to say, is a perceptual characteristic of sound. It's how loud, I know, I hate to use doublespeak like that, but it's how loud you perceive the sound itself to be. Amplitude is something that's measurable. We can actually measure the amplitude of an audio file. If I come back over here to Reaper, and we're going to zoom in on our tracks here. Oops, wrong button. I always do that. And the amplitude at any moment is how high do these audio files, waveforms, go. So we can see here that the amplitude goes here. And this amplitude is actually shown in the momentary amplitude in our faders or meters. So if I play...
The Army. We understood the marshalling...
Oops, let me just solo this one and clear everything out.
The Army in its proper subdivisions.
So we can see that we're getting an amplitude of a max amplitude peak of negative 7.0 decibels full
and the control
scale.
Of military expenditure.
And the momentary
the Army in its proper
amplitude
the graduations
goes
of
up and
rank
down, and
among
this
the
meter
officers,
shows us that relative amplitude level up and down. So amplitude, again, is something we can actually measure. It's how loud is a sound source moment to moment according to the waveforms that are happening. Loudness is how loud we perceive a sound source. And the reason the two of those are sometimes different is that a sound that contains a whole bunch of low frequency information might have a really high amplitude, but be perceived as being lower in loudness. And likewise, if we go way, way high in high frequency, let's say we're above the range of human hearing, you're not going to perceive something that has a frequency above the range of human hearing to be loud because you can't hear it. But a computer or some other measurement device might recognize the amplitude of that as being something incredibly loud. So again, loudness deals with kind of these perceptual characteristics. And so when I say loudness, I'm actually specifically referring to any perceptual characteristics of a sound's loudness. And when I say amplitude, I'm referring to the measurable thing. So in this other variation, when we're thinking about loudness, here we're doing minimal amplitude on each of our sound sources, so they all sound quiet together. In our variation number 2, we have the first source as being the loudest, our second source as being kind of a medium loudness, and our third source as being not very loud at all. And depending on the quality of those sound sources, that will result in different types of emergent qualities for our sound work. And likewise, in variation 3, we've got sound source 1 being quite small, and sound sources 2 and 3 being incredibly large. And again, that's going to change the resulting emergent output. And as you work with sound more and get a comfort for different types of sound sources and qualities of sound sources, you'll start to get a feel for how changing the relative loudness between these sources will affect the qualities that we perceive. Another thing you might want to play around with is this idea of sudden amplitude differences. Well, let's go back here actually, and we'll do some loudness examples in Reaper. So, oh, that was my phone. I'm sorry. It's the buzzer is so loud on it. So let's shrink this down here, and we've got some stuff from our editing from earlier. And let's grab some of these sources. We'll continue to shrink this down. So we'll grab our Art of War, which is right there, and we'll put another one here. We'll just come on. Move it over and we'll bring it up. No need to solo that. And then we'll grab, oh, we've got a train sound. And our geese, of course. Oh, I hate geese. Just mean, nasty things. Okay. And we're going to do away. I've got this thunk right now, so we're just going to delete that for the time being. We don't need it. Yep. And we'll rearrange our tracks here. We'll bring our Art of War tracks up. And if we play these, let's see here. I'm going to select all of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to normalize these tracks so that the peak of each of them is 0 decibels full scale. And what that means, again, of course, is that the loudest moment in the track goes up to the maximum volume that's possible in a digital system. And now if we play these together, I'll turn down the master fader so it doesn't blow our ears out. You'll notice that many of these are likely to peak because we go to 0 dB. And I'm not going to get into it, but there's this idea of a true peak, which is essentially, it doesn't matter. But they are likely to peak even though they technically only go to 0. And then combined, it's likely also to cause peaks on our master fader. So let's see here.
The army. The moral law causes the people to graduations of rank with their officers, so that they will follow him regardless of by which supplies may undismayed by any controlling military.
So we can clearly hear 2 voices, a train, and some geese.
Open grounds and narrow passes, the chances of life. Let them.
Great. Now, if we took these and we made them all softer, as in variation 1, and I'm just going to grab the faders here to do that. Obviously, it's going to create a softer sounding, softer feeling piece for a moment. And you can barely hear it. And that's nice. That could have an effect depending on what you were trying to go for. But let's see how this changes as we start to raise these. So I'll raise my geese a little bit. And now I can't hear anything else because the geese amplitude level essentially is louder than everything else I'm trying to hear. Gotta love geese. Okay. So let's put our playhead in here. If I start to raise the train, because it comes up in volume and goes back down, it then starts to take over the geese before it's going to fade back away. We're going to loop back over here. So let's start to add our Art of War.
Undismayed by any danger.
If I just wanted some background talking, I might leave it right here.
Times and seasons.
If I want to create a sense of two voices, I can mix the two of them together.
Danger. Therefore, open grounds and narrow passes. The chances of life. The moral law causes.
So let's
the
say I
people
want to
to
make it seem as though there's a
graduations
single
of their
speaker who's
voices,
predominantly
so that
more
they
important. I might bring down our
regardless of their
broad
voices,
frequency train
undismayed
noise.
by any danger.
Bring up this single
Heaven
speaker.
signifies
Oops,
night
too
and
much
day,
there.
cold and heat,
And then
times
pull
and
down
seasons.
the other one.
Earth comprises
Just giving it a
distances,
background quality.
great and small, danger and security, open ground and narrow passes, the chances of life. The moral law causes the people to be in complete accord
So
with their
right
ruler,
now, this
so
is
that they will
similar
follow him regardless of their
to
lives,
our situation
undismayed by any
where we've got
danger.
one loud
Heaven
source, and that'd be the
signifies
speaker.
night and day,
Kind of these
cold
geese as our
and
medium
heat,
loud source, and then the
times
train and
seasons.
other voice as our quieter
Earth
background
comprises
sources. So I'm
distances,
essentially creating kind of a
great and
foreground,
small,
middle ground,
danger and
background
security,
relationship,
open ground
through
and narrow
amplitude
passes, the chances of life.
and we can change that again. There's some children on the background of the geese, which is kind of nice.
These 5 heads should be familiar to every Japanese. He who knows them will be victorious. He who knows
So this one,
them
the geese are clearly front and center, foreground.
Therefore, in your
The talking, which almost sounds like a conversation between the two voices, are middle ground, and our train is our background. So we can start to see how these amplitude relationships change the emergent qualities of the work based on the relationships of them to each other. Another one I want to talk about is kind of sudden amplitude differences. So let's grab, we've got our train sound here. Oh, you know that thunk that I got rid of? I really wish right now I hadn't. That's okay. We'll grab this. So we've got our talking, and let's assume we're gonna move this over, put our door right there. We're just gonna normalize our door, and we'll normalize our talking just so we give a sense of what's going on with them. And we can zoom in on these two sources. And what I get interested in at the moment now is this idea of changing amplitude levels suddenly. So let's just assume we've got the single sound source. And I'll split these sounds at a couple spots here.
with whom lie the advantages derived. 3. With whom lie the advantages derived from heaven and earth.
Oh, that's a boring piece. Let's grab something else here. We'll just grab something from there.
When their substance is drained away, the peasantry will be afflicted by heavy exactions. With this loss of substance and exhaustion of strength, the homes of
So we'll just do some quick editing here so there's no spaces. We've got snapping turned off, so I'll grab this and this. Delete it, bring it over. A little bit of overlap. Delete it, bring it over. A little bit of overlap. Delete it. Okay. And we've done the effect essentially of breaking up our audio a little bit as well. So let's listen to this.
peasantry will be afflicted by heavy exactions. With this loss of substance and exhaustion of strength, the homes of the people will be stripped bare, and 3/10 of their income will be dissipated.
Great. So now we've taken out the breaths essentially. So let's listen to that again.
Peasantry will be afflicted by heavy exactions. With this loss of substance and exhaustion of strength, the homes of the
So let's assume we're going to take the amplitude of our first section and bring it down by 6 decibels, which is quite a bit. Essentially cuts it in half. We'll leave this one exactly where it's at, if not boost it up a little bit higher. And then we'll bring this back, this next one down 6 decibels. We'll bring it down 3 decibels because it'll be fine. We're probably going to get a clicking in there. So let's see here now how this sounds.
When their substance is drained away, the peasantry will be afflicted by heavy exactions. With this loss of substance and exhaustion of strength, the homes of the people will be stripped bare, and 3/10 of their income will be dissipated, while government expenses for broken...
Great. So that was not quite the effect that I want. Let's go a little bit further. So we'll bring this down even further. And I'm going to zoom right in here.
Loss of substance. With this loss of substance,
This will actually go with this loss of substance. So we'll keep this soft at 3.
loss of substance, and
We'll come back down. Because I want to really exaggerate all of this.
peasantry will be afflicted by heavy exactions. With this loss of substance and with this loss of substance and exactions. With this loss of substance and
Great. So you can start to see how we can create this effect by having kind of sudden shifts in volume. Loudness. And it's going to
will be
affect,
afflicted by heavy exactions. With this loss of substance and exhaustion of strength, the
it allows us essentially to create differing effects about how we're perceiving the audio. Let's grab all this now, and I'm just going to overdo. Oops, I always forget that I can't do that. Sorry, I bounce around different DAWs, and I forget how some work and others. So it's whatever. Okay, now let's unmute this audio file, and we'll pop it over here. Dorwood, we'll keep that at 0. We're going to drop the fader for our voice now.
way, the peasantry will be afflicted by heavy exactions. With this loss of substance and exhaustion of strength, the home
And you can hear how we can have that loud sound essentially break in and alter our feeling of how the amplitude is going in the piece. Now, these aren't great sounds. I should have found some more impactful sounds, some ridiculous explosions from movies or something like that. But this idea of sudden changes can be a really powerful one. All right. The next thing I want to think about is kind of the idea of crescendos, decrescendos from music term. And there's 2 ways to go about that. Let's actually, our train sound is a great example of this. So we'll grab it over here and move this way down the line. Still put our train right here. And you can see this crescendo, decrescendo actually built into our train sound. Presumably that's from it coming and going in the recording. So now you can see this kind of crescendo where the sound gets bigger, decrescendo where the sound goes away. We'll wipe that all away. And if we listen to it, that's what we perceive as well. We could exaggerate those. So let's use our fade in to add even more to that. And you'll notice how it multiplies it down over there. So now we can have even more crescendo in. And that was over a long period of time. So let's shorten that so we can exaggerate it. And we can change our fade type if we open up our preferences. So let's do an exponential on the other side here. Apply. Again, so we get that nice crescendo in our sound. If we shorten it, do the same thing here. And again, we'll do a different type of fade out shape. Nope, I wanted that one. So we have this gesture of a crescendo, decrescendo. We can do the same thing by actually building up sounds in space. And there's a nice visual for that here, where you can see as we add additional sounds, it's going to create the perception of a louder and louder feel. So this is something you can use to your advantage as a creator, is that by adding more sounds, it can create this sense of additional amplitude and loudness. All right, stereo placement in here. Okay, so let's open Reaper back up, and we'll use our same train sound, because I think it does a nice job here. And actually, I'm going to shorten it up on each other side. So we've just got the loud portion here. I'll duplicate it out a little bit. And if you can actually hear, there is a sense of already a stereo depth in this recording, because it was recorded clearly with stereo microphones. And so there's differences on both sides. So what I'm going to do for the moment is actually find, let's use this person talking instead for this example. And we'll just do some things to make it a little bit more ridiculous sounding. By means of these considerations, I forecast victory 40 feet. The general department council great. Let's touch on be obtained in command. The general department is not my council. Will defeat. Let's touch on be dismissed. While being council, there is also so now it just kind of sounds like gibberish, but it's all coming out of the center channel, which is useful to us for the moment. Victory 40 feet. The general department is my council. Will conquer. Let's touch on be obtained in command. The general department is not my council. Of course, if I take my pan knob over here. Victory 40 feet. The general department is my council. Will conquer. Let's touch on be obtained in command. The general department is not my council. That's my volume knob, excuse me. While being council, there is also circumstances over and beyond the ordinary rules. According to circumstances favorable, one plans. My pan knob is right here or down in the mixer on top. Of course, now coming from the left speaker. Of course, coming from the right speaker. And we can hear that movement. Attacking where he is unprepared, appear where you are not expected. These military devices leading to victory must not be divulged beforehand. Now, the general wins battle makes many calculations to tell where battle is fought. The general loses battle makes a few calculations beforehand. Thus, many calculations lead to victory and few calculations to defeat. Which is nice. But if we grab that sound and we pair it with our train sound here, and we grab our obnoxious geese sound here, and we'll grab this and we'll copy it one more time. And then instead of doing 4, we'll do 0.25. Okay. Forecast victory. The general. Wonderful. So the first thing we need to do before we can start making any stereo choices is actually deal with the relative amplitude mix of these things. And so I can pretty much guarantee you the geese and the train are going to be too loud, and the fast talk is going to be too loud. So we'll mix in to our slow speech, which is something I want to kind of emphasize anyway. The general okay, so now we got our fast speech kind of mixed in there. And our train. And our geese. And now what I want you to notice is how does it change the quality of this snippet of audio as I start to move these sources around the stereo field. By moving the train to the right and the geese to the left, it opens up some space in the center of our stereo field for the two voices to work against each other. It creates this depth and width in our stereo image as well. That's interesting, at least to me. Whether it is to you or not, I don't know. But it's something to think about when you're building on these things, this idea of stereo placement. And of course, also the idea of moving a source within the stereo field over time. And you're going to need to wait until the next page before you can learn how to do that. But know that's important. Okay, so the last thing I want you to do is to pay attention. I do want you to read the first 4 chapters from this book, The Mixing Engineer's Handbook, which is posted on Moodle. And it talks about some of these aspects of mixing on the technical, with the technical hat on. And I think it's a really nice way to frame that conversation away from the creative. So again, asking you to try and distinguish between these two areas.